He had never imagined his life would amount to anything more than sifting through piles of discarded metal and broken machinery. Riven was just an ordinary scavenger, scouring the wreckage of old cities and abandoned battlefields for anything of value. He had spent years collecting rusty prosthetics, arms, legs, and various mechanical limbs, trading them for food, shelter, or the occasional extra piece of tech. The prosthetics weren't worth much, but to him, they were pieces of a forgotten world, remnants of battles fought by people who had long since passed. One day, as Riven dug through the wreckage of an old military outpost, his hands trembling as he sifted through the tangled heap, he felt something different. His gut twisted with a feeling he couldn't quite place. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Something, or someone, was watching him. He spun around, heart pounding, and saw her. A tall figure cloaked in dark, iridescent armor stood in the shadows, her presence unsettlingly silent, her eyes, sharp and glowing with an eerie green hue, fixed on him. "I need your help," she said, her voice a low, metallic hum, as though it was filtered through layers of machinery. Riven blinked, confusion making his mind reel. "My help? I'm just a scavenger. I know what you are," the alien warrior interrupted, her voice strangely soothing despite its unnatural tone. "I know what you collect. I need those prosthetics. They are more than just scrap to me." Riven's brow furrowed. Why would you need rusty prosthetics? He had seen all sorts of people, soldiers, mechanics, doctors, pick through the debris, but no one had ever seemed interested in the dilapidated limbs he gathered. The alien stepped closer, her movements fluid, like a predator sizing up its prey. "Because they are not just prosthetics. They hold ancient technology, lost designs from my people. We were forced to abandon our bodies in a war that spanned galaxies. Our soldiers, our warriors, used prosthetics like those to survive. What you collect are not just scraps of metal. They are keys to the technology that could save my species." Riven's mind struggled to catch up with the words she was speaking. His life had been so small, so ordinary. He had never even considered that something as simple as the pieces he found could hold such significance. "You want me to find more?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, unsure if he was asking out of curiosity or fear. "I need every piece you have," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "And I need you to come with me." Riven hesitated, the weight of her words settling on him like a heavy cloak. He had always been alone, scavenging through the ruins of a dead world, but this felt different. This felt like something bigger, something beyond the dreary existence he had known. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice steadier now, though still filled with doubt. The alien warrior's lips curled into a faint smile, one that almost seemed comforting. "To the stars," she said simply. "We have much work to do." And in that moment, Riven understood that his days of collecting discarded metal were over. He was no longer just an ordinary scavenger. The universe had just opened up before him, and with it, a new purpose he could never have imagined. Riven stood in stunned silence, his mind racing to catch up with the alien's words. The promise of something beyond the scorched earth he had known all his life pulled at him, but there was a gnawing sense of trepidation deep inside. He had never left the ruins of the old cities, let alone ventured to the stars. It felt like a lifetime ago when he'd given up on dreams of anything grander than his daily survival. But the warrior's eyes, glowing with an almost desperate intensity, made it clear this was no ordinary request. Riven began, but his voice faltered. "I don't know how to get to the stars. I don't even know where to begin." The alien tilted her head, her armor gleaming faintly under the dim light of the wreckage. "You will learn. My people once had great ships. We can restore them with what you find. The prosthetics are part of the key, but there is more, much more." She stepped forward, her movement graceful yet deliberate. "You, Riven, are not just a scavenger anymore. You are the link to our salvation." "Salvation?" Riven echoed, still processing what she was saying. "Why me? Why not anyone else?" She paused, studying him closely. "Because you have a talent for finding things that others overlook. The lost, the forgotten, the broken. You know how to see potential in what is discarded. That is what my people need now." His chest tightened. "What do I have to do?" The warrior extended a hand, palm open. "I am Kalshar, and together, we will search the stars for what is lost." The technology we need is scattered across the universe, hidden in forgotten corners. You will guide me to it. Together, we will rebuild the power of my people." Riven stared at her outstretched hand. The idea of embarking on some grand mission terrified him, but something deep inside stirred. It had been so long since he'd felt any sense of purpose beyond his own survival. Maybe this was his chance to be a part of something that mattered. Swallowing his fear, Riven took a cautious step forward. He placed his hand in hers. "All right," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll help you." Kalshar's grip tightened, and for the first time since he met her, Riven saw something in her eyes that wasn't just determination. There was a flicker of hope, a spark that had been missing for far too long. "Good," she said. "The journey ahead will not be easy, but you will never walk it alone." With that, Kalshar turned and led him toward a small, sleek craft hidden among the wreckage. It was unlike anything Riven had ever seen, no larger than a shuttle, but it exuded an undeniable energy, its smooth, dark surface seeming to hum with life. Riven's heart pounded in his chest as they approached. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, if he could handle the dangers of the unknown. But he knew one thing for certain: his life as a scavenger was over. And with that, his journey into the stars began. The interior of the ship was nothing like Riven had ever imagined. Instead of the cold, utilitarian design he'd expected, the walls were soft, fluid-looking, almost organic. The lighting was dim, with an eerie, ambient glow that pulsed gently, as though the ship itself was alive. Every surface seemed to hum with a quiet, almost sentient energy, responding to Cal's every movement. "This is your ship?" Riven asked, his voice tinged with awe as he glanced around. His hands itched to touch the smooth surfaces, to learn more about the strange craft. Kalshar nodded. "It was once part of a fleet, my fleet. From before the war, we were able to salvage fragments of it, and with the prosthetics you'll find, we can restore more. But it will take time. We have to be careful." Riven nodded, though his mind was buzzing with questions. "So, what now? Do we just start looking for more prosthetics across the galaxy?" Kalshar's gaze softened, but there was still an edge of urgency in her eyes. "We start small. There is a place, near the fringes of the outer rim, where remnants of my people were last seen. A few hidden caches of old tech. You'll know them when you see them. The prosthetics you've collected, they're not just parts. They're fragments of something ancient, something that can help us rebuild." Riven hesitated. The enormity of it all was starting to sink in. This wasn't just about scavenging. This was about finding pieces of an entire civilization, bringing back technology that could change the fate of a species. "Are you sure we'll find something there?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost uncertain. "I mean, how can I even tell what's useful?" Kalshar's lips curved into a faint smile. "That's why I need you. You know what to look for. Trust your instincts. These prosthetics you've been gathering, they're not just junk. They're not just broken limbs. They're tools. Each piece, each design, holds a key to something greater. You've been collecting the pieces of a puzzle, Riven. Now we have to put it together." Riven felt a surge of determination. He wasn't just collecting scrap anymore. This was something bigger than himself, something that could save an entire species, and maybe, just maybe, give him a purpose he'd never dared to dream of. He had spent his life searching for scraps, looking for value where others saw only decay. Now he was searching for pieces of the future. Kalshar stepped toward the console at the center of the ship, and with a few quick movements, she brought up a star map on the screen. It was covered in a web of symbols and coordinates, most of which were foreign to Riven. "This is our first destination," she said, pointing to a small, unmarked system on the map. "A derelict research station. It's been abandoned for decades, but I know my people left something behind there, something that can help us move forward." Riven studied the map, his eyes scanning the unfamiliar stars. It was a long journey to the outer rim, but it wasn't impossible. The promise of a new life, one where he wasn't just picking through scraps, stirred something inside him. "What are we waiting for?" he said, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. Kalshar's eyes gleamed with something between amusement and admiration. "Good. Let's go find your next treasure, Riven." As the ship hummed to life, Riven felt a thrill run through him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. The vessel lifted from the ground, leaving the wreckage of the old world behind. Through the viewing port, Riven watched as the dark sky outside transformed into a sea of stars, the vastness of the universe stretching out before him. His heart raced, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. There was so much more to discover out there, so much more than rusty prosthetics. And the universe, as Kalshar had said, was alive with possibility. Days turned into weeks as they journeyed toward the outer rim, and Riven learned more than he ever thought possible. Kalshar taught him about the ancient technologies his people had once wielded, powerful AI systems, energy shields, weapons capable of unimaginable destruction, and prosthetics that were far beyond anything Riven had ever seen. Each lesson felt like unlocking a new level in a game he hadn't even known he was playing. But the deeper they ventured into the unknown, the more Riven began to understand the weight of the mission they had undertaken. It wasn't just about finding the pieces of a lost civilization. The war Kalshar spoke of had scarred entire galaxies. There were enemies still hunting her people, enemies who would stop at nothing to ensure their extinction. The closer they got to the derelict research station, the more Riven's nerves began to fray. Every shadow in the vast expanse of space seemed to hide a threat. Every star that blinked in the distance felt like a reminder of how fragile their mission was. But Kalshar was unshaken, her resolve as firm as the ship's hull, and though Riven was scared, he also felt something stirring within him. For the first time in his life, he was part of something that mattered. He wasn't just a scavenger anymore. He was an integral piece of something far larger than himself. And that, in itself, was worth the risk. The journey to the outer rim seemed endless, stretching on like a long, quiet heartbeat. The hum of the ship became a constant companion, as did Cal's steady presence at the helm. Riven spent hours going over the prosthetics he'd collected, examining them with newfound interest. He had once thought of them as mere tools for survival, things to trade or use for parts. Now, each one felt like a piece of an intricate puzzle, and every time he learned something new from Cal, his sense of purpose grew stronger. Cal had been right, Riven's instincts were sharper than he realized. When she explained the ancient technologies embedded within the prosthetics, it clicked. The way certain pieces responded to his touch, the way some seemed to hum with a faint, almost imperceptible energy, it was clear there was more to them than just metal and wires. It was like the pieces were waiting for him to unlock their potential. They finally arrived at the outer rim after what seemed like an eternity. The dark expanse of space surrounding them in every direction. The research station, or what remained of it, appeared on their sensors just as Cal had predicted, an abandoned relic, drifting in the cold void, cloaked in layers of cosmic dust. The station was a massive structure, its once pristine surface now weathered and pocked by the passage of time. Broken, warped beams of metal and shattered windows glinted in the light from distant stars. Riven felt a strange sense of reverence as they approached, wondering what secrets the station might hold. "It's not much to look at," Cal said as she brought the ship in for a landing on the station's tattered docking platform. "But it's where we start." Riven nodded, his pulse quickening as he looked out the viewing port. "What are we looking for exactly?" Cal's voice turned serious, her gaze fixed on the station's structure. "We'll know it when we see it. There's a chamber here, hidden in the deepest part of the station. My people used it to store the most important relics. But the station's systems were sabotaged during the war. It's not going to be easy to get in." She turned toward him. "We're going to need to work together if we're going to make it out alive. Are you ready?" Riven looked down at his hands, the ones that had once just scavenged for scraps, now holding the potential to change the future. He didn't hesitate. "I'm ready." The door to the station was rusted and reluctant to open, but with Cal's guidance and a few well-placed commands, they pried it loose. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with the scent of decay, and the low hum of malfunctioning systems echoed off the walls. The dim lights flickered intermittently, casting long, eerie shadows across the crumbling corridors. "Stay close," Cal whispered, leading the way with quiet precision. Her movements were calculated, as if she knew every inch of the station, even in its current disrepair. Riven followed her, his breath steady but every footstep sounding too loud in the silence of the station. They navigated the maze of broken hallways and collapsed rooms, the place seemingly abandoned for centuries. But something about the stillness unsettled Riven, as though the station was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. After what felt like hours, They reached a heavy, reinforced door at the end of a narrow corridor. The door was sealed tight, a small panel next to it showing signs of wear. But Cal didn't hesitate. She moved to the console, her fingers dancing across the ancient interface, her brow furrowed in concentration. "This is it," she said quietly. "We'll need to bypass the security lock to get inside. It's a bit tricky, but I know the system." Riven stepped closer, watching as Cal worked. "How do you know so much about this place?" he asked. "You've been here before?" Cal's fingers paused for a moment, her expression unreadable. "I was part of a team that helped build it. We never meant for it to end like this." Riven didn't press her further. Whatever had happened, it was clear that it had left deep scars. Instead, he kept his focus on the door, eyes flicking nervously to the shadows. Every instinct told him something was off, something about this station wasn't as abandoned as it seemed. Suddenly, Cal cursed under her breath. "I can't bypass it manually anymore. The system's corrupt, something's locking me out." Her voice was sharp with frustration. Riven felt a chill crawl up his spine. "What do we do now?" Cal turned toward him, her eyes flashing with resolve. "We force our way in." She stepped back, her hands moving to a device attached to her belt, a small tool that Riven had never seen before. With a few clicks, it expanded into a handheld plasma cutter. "Get ready," she said, and before Riven could respond, she ignited the cutter and moved to the door's reinforced lock. The plasma cutter hummed to life, slicing through the door's metal with a controlled, clean precision. Riven couldn't help but admire her expertise. She worked quickly, the cutter's beam glowing brightly in the dim light of the station. The door gave way with a final, heavy groan, and the moment it slid open, a rush of stale air hit Riven's face. Inside the chamber, dimly lit by flickering lights, rows of containers lined the walls, some small, some large, and in the center of the room, sitting atop a pedestal, was a single, gleaming object. It radiated a soft, bluish light. Riven's heart skipped a beat. That object, he knew instinctively, that was what they had come for. Cal stepped inside, her eyes fixed on the glowing relic. "This is it," she murmured, "the last piece of the puzzle." But before Riven could ask what it was, a sudden, bone-chilling sound echoed through the chamber. The door slammed shut behind them, and before they could react, a low, mechanical voice filled the room. "Unauthorized entry detected. Security protocols activated." Riven's blood ran cold. He had been right, the station wasn't as abandoned as it seemed. A soft, mechanical whirring began from the shadows. Something, or someone, was coming for them. Riven's pulse thundered in his ears as the chamber's lights flickered wildly, casting sharp shadows that danced across the walls. The mechanical voice repeated, its tone flat and emotionless. "Security protocols activated." Before Riven could react, the ground trembled beneath their feet. From the darkness of the chamber's far corners, a low hum grew louder, and then, out of the shadows, emerged hulking figures, humanoid in shape, but their movements jerky and unnatural. They were armed with bladed weapons and carried the unmistakable signs of ancient war machines. Their bodies were patched with scrap metal, and their eyes glowed a cold, mechanical red. "Cal," Riven shouted, his voice barely audible over the hum of the machines. "What are these things?" Kalshar didn't flinch, her hand already reaching for the side of her armor. "Security automatons. They were left behind to protect the station's most valuable assets. It seems they've been activated by our presence." "They're not friendly, are they?" Riven asked, eyeing the approaching figures, the glint of their weapons gleaming in the dim light. "Not in the slightest," Cal replied grimly. She snapped her fingers, and a series of high-pitched beeps came from the armor on her wrist. "Stay close to me. I'll buy us some time. When I give the signal, we run for the exit." Riven's heart raced as he glanced at the glowing relic on the pedestal, so close, and yet, so far. The relic they had come for was crucial to their mission, but facing these automaton sentries wasn't part of the plan. He gritted his teeth, realizing there was no way out now but through. The automatons charged, their movements unervingly swift for their bulk. One lunged at Cal, but she was quicker, ducking under its swipe and pulling a sleek energy blade from her side. The blade hummed to life with a sharp, electric crackle, and in a single, fluid motion, she slashed at the machine's leg, sending it crumpling to the floor with a screech of metal. "Go for the relic," Cal shouted, her voice barely rising above the clashing sounds of battle. "I'll hold them off." Riven didn't hesitate. His legs propelled him forward, faster than he'd ever moved before. As he sprinted toward the pedestal, the relic's soft glow beckoned him like a siren song. It was close enough now that he could almost touch it, but his hand was still inches away when a loud crash erupted behind him. He spun just in time to see one of the automatons charging at him, its massive arm raised to strike. Riven's heart slammed against his ribs, his mind scrambling for a way out. Cal's voice rang out again, sharp and commanding. "Riven, now!" Without thinking, Riven dove for the pedestal, grabbing the relic in one swift motion, his fingers wrapping around the cool, smooth surface. The moment he touched it, a surge of energy coursed through his body, lighting up every nerve, every muscle. It was as though the relic recognized him, responding to his touch with a sudden, overwhelming force. The room around him seemed to warp as the relic's energy pulsed and thrummed. The automaton's movements slowed, and Riven felt his senses sharpen. Every detail in the room became clear, as if time itself had stretched and slowed. He could see the gears and wires inside the machines, the intricate designs that made them tick, and in the back of his mind, something clicked. With the relic in his hands, he now understood how to disable them. The energy from the relic flowed through his arms, and without thinking, he lifted it toward the charging automaton. A pulse of light erupted from it, a beam of raw, concentrated energy, striking the machine square in the chest. The automaton screeched and staggered back, sparks flying from the point of impact. It collapsed to the ground in a heap, its red glowing eyes dimming to nothing. Riven's breath came in shallow bursts, the weight of the relic now settling on his shoulders. The room seemed to shift again, the power of the relic overwhelming him, and for a moment, he wasn't sure what was real and what was a result of the strange energy surging through him. He glanced toward Cal, who was still battling the other sentries, her energy blade flashing as she cut through them with precision. "Cal," Riven shouted, his voice hoarse, I can stop them. I can feel it." Cal's eyes locked onto him, her face lighting up with a fierce look of determination. "Do it, Riven, we don't have much time." Without thinking further, Riven held the relic aloft. The energy inside him, the pulse of ancient power, flowed into the artifact and out again, forming a powerful barrier of light. The remaining automatons halted in their tracks, their mechanical systems screeching in protest as the light spread across the room, disabling them one by one. The energy was too much for them, circuits fried, gears locked, and within seconds, they were nothing more than lifeless husks. The silence that followed was deafening. Riven stood frozen, his breath ragged, staring at the now destroyed automatons around him. The relic in his hand hummed quietly, its light dimming to a steady glow. Kalshar moved toward him slowly, her face unreadable, but her eyes scanning him with something that looked almost like awe. You did it." Riven's pulse still raced, his hands trembling as he lowered the relic. The weight of what he had just done settled over him. He had never imagined he'd be able to do anything like this. He wasn't just a scavenger anymore, he was holding the key to something far greater than he had ever dreamed. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. "What happens now?" Kalshar took the relic from his hands, her fingers brushing his for a brief moment. "Now, we finish what we started. This relic is more than just a piece of technology. It's a beacon, a signal to the lost archives of my people. With it, we can unlock the rest of the technology we need to rebuild." She turned and started toward the door, the weight of the relic now safely secured in her grasp. "Come on, Riven, this is just the beginning. We have much further to go." Riven followed her, his thoughts swirling as they moved through the station. He couldn't help but feel the gravity of their mission. The universe was vast, full of hidden dangers and untold secrets. But now, for the first time in his life, he wasn't alone in it. He had a purpose, and together with Cal, they would uncover the truth of the stars, and what it meant to rebuild a forgotten people. The journey had just begun. Riven and Cal moved through the research station in tense silence, the relic between them now pulsing softly in Cal's hands, its presence almost tangible in the air. The once abandoned station no longer felt like an empty shell. It hummed with life, its secrets stirring awake like the echoes of a long-forgotten past. The hum of the ancient technology was faint, but it vibrated through the walls, through the very floor beneath their feet. The door to the docking bay loomed ahead, a looming reminder that the way out was still fraught with danger. The station, once silent and dead, seemed to be alive again in response to their intrusion. Riven felt the tension building, the quiet moments stretching out as he prepared for whatever came next. "Do you think we're safe now?" he asked quietly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. Kalshar's eyes remained fixed ahead, but her posture shifted, a subtle tension running through her body. "We're never truly safe," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Not while we're carrying this relic. It's the key to everything, my people's future, their history. There are still others out there who would stop at nothing to take it from us." Riven nodded slowly, understanding. He hadn't even considered that there might be other forces, other factions hunting the relic or seeking to control what it represented. The galaxy was a far more dangerous place than he'd ever realized. They reached the docking bay doors, and Cal paused, her hand hovering over a control panel beside it. She pressed a few buttons, and the doors slid open with a heavy metallic groan. The sight that met them was both welcome and terrifying. Outside, the ship sat, gleaming in the quiet dark of space. But something was wrong. Riven's senses flared as he stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. The ship was undamaged, but the area surrounding it had been disturbed. There were marks on the ground, footprints in the dust, and a faint glimmer of movement near the shadows. "Someone's here," Riven murmured, his voice low. Kalshar's hand instinctively went to the hilt of her energy blade, her eyes scanning the area. "We're not alone." Before either of them could react, a figure stepped out from behind a cluster of debris, emerging into the dim light cast by the distant stars. Riven's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the figure. It was a man, tall, wearing a long, dark cloak that blended into the shadows. His face was hidden behind a visor, but Riven could see the outline of his features, the angular lines of someone who had seen too many battles. He was armed, a weapon slung across his back, and his presence was undeniably commanding. "Looks like you found it," the man said, his voice smooth but edged with something cold. "I'm impressed." Kalshar's posture stiffened, her eyes narrowing. "You're one of them, aren't you? A scavenger turned mercenary." The man chuckled darkly. "You could say that. I've worked for all kinds of people, including the ones who would do anything to control what you found. That relic, it's more dangerous than you realize, and I've been hired to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Riven's blood ran cold. The last thing they needed was someone else after the relic. He glanced at Cal, searching her face for a sign of what to do next. Cal stepped forward, her voice steady but laced with threat. "If you think I'm going to hand it over to you, you're gravely mistaken." The man's hand went to the weapon on his back, his fingers brushing the hilt of a sleek, futuristic gun. "I'm not here to take it by force, not yet, anyway, but I will warn you, Kalshar, if you keep moving forward with this foolishness, you're only bringing more danger to yourself. There are powers at play here that you can't even begin to understand, and they will stop at nothing to get what you have." Riven felt a growing unease. Whoever this man was, he wasn't just some random mercenary. There was an air of authority about him that set Riven's teeth on edge. "What do you want, then?" Cal asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "If you're not here to take it, then what's your game?" The man gave a slight smirk, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm here to offer you a choice. You don't have to fight this battle alone, Kalshar. You can hand over the relic to me, and I'll see to it that your people are restored, with the right backing, with the right resources." Kalshar's expression hardened. "You think I'd ever trust someone like you?" He shrugged, unfazed. "It's not about trust. It's about survival. I'm not offering you an alliance, Cal. I'm offering you a chance to live, because, trust me, without help, you'll be dead long before you even get close to using that relic. Your enemies are already hunting you, and I'm your only chance to stay ahead of them." Riven's gaze flicked between the man and Cal, his mind racing. There was no way this man was offering them anything good. Kalshar had made it clear, this was about something far bigger than just her survival. But what if the man was telling the truth? What if their enemies were closing in, and they didn't have the resources to fight back? Kalshar stood silent for a long moment, her eyes cold and unwavering as she assessed the man. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but filled with quiet fury. You think I would ever give up the chance to restore my people for an alliance with someone like you? No. I would rather die fighting than surrender what little hope we have left. The man's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a pleasant one. Your stubbornness will be your downfall, Kalshar. But if that's the choice you want, then fine. But don't think you'll get far without me. Without another word, he turned and melted back into the shadows, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. The only sign of his presence now was the faint echo of his boots on the station floor and the lingering, heavy tension in the air. Riven exhaled, his heart still racing. What now? Kalshar turned toward him, the steel in her gaze unwavering. We move forward. The enemies he spoke of are real, but that doesn't change what we need to do. We have the relic. We have the power to rebuild. She glanced at the ship, her resolve strengthening. It's time to leave. Our journey's far from over. Riven nodded, his fear for the future tempered by the strength he saw in Kal. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with more dangers than he could comprehend. But one thing was clear, he was no longer just a scavenger. He was part of something much bigger now, and he would stand beside Kalshar, no matter what came next. Together, they would face the unknown. Together, they would rebuild. The quiet, oppressive atmosphere of the station seemed to follow them as they boarded the ship. The doors hissed shut behind them, sealing them in a space that felt far too small for the weight of their mission. Riven took a deep breath as he glanced around the interior. The ship was old, but it felt more like home now. It wasn't just a vehicle to get from one place to another, it was a symbol of the journey ahead. Kalshar sat at the controls, her fingers moving swiftly over the console, inputting a set of coordinates into the navigation system. Riven took a seat beside her, unable to shake the feeling that the man, whoever he was, had been only the first of many dangers they would face. You were right not to trust him, Riven said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but underneath, there was a note of uncertainty. But do you think he'll actually leave us alone? Kalshar didn't look up from the controls as she spoke. No, he's not someone who leaves things unfinished. But he's not our biggest problem. The enemies he mentioned, they are. And they will come for us eventually. We just need to be ready. Riven nodded, though part of him felt a growing sense of dread. The relic, now safely secured in a compartment near the cockpit, was their only lead, the only thing that could help Kalshar and her people rebuild. But it was also a beacon, a signal to forces far more powerful than they had yet encountered, forces that would stop at nothing to take it. Kalshar finished entering the coordinates, and the ship hummed to life. We're heading to a safe house, she said, one of the last places my people had hidden before the war. It's far off the beaten path, but it's secure for now. We'll need to lay low, gather information, and plan our next move. Riven looked out the viewing port as the ship powered up, the stars outside growing distant as they accelerated. The black expanse of space stretched on infinitely, a reminder of just how small they were in the grand scheme of things. I don't know how much longer we can keep this up, he said, the weight of the situation creeping into his voice. Every time we take a step forward, we seem to make more enemies. What if we can't outrun them? What if we don't have enough time to find the answers we need? Kalshar finally turned her gaze toward him, her eyes sharp and filled with a quiet fire. Then we fight. We survive. Because the alternative is letting everything die, and I won't let that happen. Riven met her gaze, and for the first time since they had started this journey, he felt a flicker of hope. Kalshar wasn't just a leader, she was a force, and her determination was something he could follow. They spent the next few hours in silence as the ship cut through the void, heading toward the coordinates Kal had entered. Riven couldn't help but think about what lay ahead. The safe house they were headed to could offer them temporary respite, but it was only a small step in a much larger plan. When the ship finally broke through the atmosphere of the planet they were approaching, Riven's nerves kicked up again. The planet below was a cold, rocky place, its surface covered in dense forests and mountainous terrain. It looked like the kind of place no one would want to visit unless they had to. Kalshar guided the ship toward a secluded valley hidden among the peaks, the landscape rugged and wild. The safe house was nestled there, hidden from prying eyes. It wasn't much, a small, fortified building with an external structure that blended seamlessly with the environment, designed to be overlooked and forgotten. We'll rest here for a while, Kalshar said as the ship landed, the engines powering down with a soft whine. No one will be able to track us here. But we can't stay long. We need to get back on the move soon. Riven nodded, a sense of relief flooding through him. At least they could regroup, plan their next step without worrying about immediate danger. As they disembarked from the ship, the cold wind of the planet hit them, biting at their skin. Riven wrapped his arms around himself, grateful for the layer of clothing he had borrowed from Cal's supplies. The safe house was a compact structure, the walls reinforced and covered in layers of camouflage to hide it from view. Cal led the way inside, her movements smooth and practiced. The interior was simple but functional, minimal furniture, equipment scattered about, and a central table covered in maps, data pads, and notes. We'll need to make contact with some old allies, Cal said, moving to a console in the corner. There are people here who may still have information about the relic, its origins, and what we can do with it. If we're going to rebuild, we need to know what we're up against. Riven walked over to the table, scanning the notes scattered across it. He saw a mix of symbols, maps of distant star systems, and references to things he didn't understand, old wars, forgotten battles, and a tangled history that felt far beyond him. I can help, Riven said, his voice firm. I've seen some of these symbols before. The prosthetics I've been collecting, they weren't just random scraps. They were pieces of something bigger. I know how to read the signs. Kalshar glanced over, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. You've been paying attention more than you realize. Riven, that's good. He looked up at her, feeling a surge of pride. If we're going to make it through this, if we're going to do what needs to be done, we have to understand everything. And I think I can help with that. Cal stood up, her expression softening for a brief moment. I don't doubt that. But there's still so much we don't know, and we can't afford to make mistakes. Riven nodded. We won't. For the rest of the day, they worked together, Riven poring over the data, Cal sending out encrypted messages to old contacts, trying to piece together the story of the relic. They needed to find out who was after them, what powers were at play, and how to protect the last hope of Cal's people. The night crept in, and the planet outside grew still. Riven's mind raced, but as he glanced at Cal, he knew one thing for certain: they were far from done. The challenges they faced were just beginning. But no matter what, they would face them together.